Slaughterhouse-Five is a novel about the destruction caused by war, the PTSD that it brings as well in soldiers and civilians that have been affected, and the human mind's attempt to cope with what it's seen. The unnecessary violence, the death, all of it, just an attempt to try to make sense of it all. The author speaks bluntly, especially in chapter 1, about what the book is about and what he wants us to take away from it. And then he intermingles science fiction, I think, to explore the PTSD, or rather to depict the feeling of the PTSD and the processing of it, as well as some very dark humor and satirical comments and scenes, all with the intention of not making war seem heroic or morally simple. War kind of comes off as the opposite of heroic. That idea is actually directly challenged in the novel, and instead we have a lot of scared, confused soldiers and civilians that are just kind of like caught in the crosshairs of the war. I think one of the biggest things that stands out to me that was said in chapter 1 and kind of reinforced throughout the novel is that war is fought by children. The war is fought by young people, and the novel starts off with a confrontation. Our author, but not the author of the novel, but maybe he might be a stand-in for the author of Slaughterhouse-Five. Anyway, in chapter 1, Billy is trying to write a novel about the war that he fought in, and he meets up with one of his buddies that he fought with, and his wife is just really heated. She's frustrated. She's walking around, and Billy's like, she's mad at me. What is going on? And finally, she says what's on her mind, and that's that you're going to write this novel, and you're going to write it heroic, and you're going to write it as if it was fought by men going off to war, and then Hollywood's going to pick it up, and then Hollywood will depict it as men being heroic, and that's not what it is. You were children when you went off. And Billy's like, yeah, we were children. And he goes, and she said, you're going to depict it as men being heroic, and then more children will go off to war. Reminds me a little bit of the Malazan quote, children are dying. Just sort of that look at the cost of war on children so often. My neighbor's mowing. I'm going to change locations. Chapter 1 also has this line where Billy is trying to figure out how to write this story, brings it up to a guy who says, is it an anti-war book? And Billy says, I guess. And he says, you should write an anti-glacier book. The idea being, war's not going anywhere. And to write about it isn't going to change a thing, which comes back up a lot in this book, this idea. And I think it's largely explored in The Aliens. So let's talk about PTSD, because I think that's what The Aliens depict here. Billy becomes unstuck in time before he's abducted by aliens. He becomes unstuck in time in Dresden, and throughout and the aliens help him to understand what being unstuck really means and how to process it, but they're not the ones that did it to him. The war did it to him, and I think that that's really significant. My understanding of PTSD, which is incredibly limited, so correct me or add to it in the comments, please, is that part of it is that you can just sort of be launched back to another time. Like you hear a car backfire and all of a sudden you're launched back into Dresden. Things can trigger memories where it feels like you're no longer experiencing life chronologically, which is essentially what we experience in this novel. So not only is the unstuck in time depicting that side of PTSD, but it's also forcing us to kind of experience it too, and how disorienting it is alongside Billy. It's kind of like Dresden, this isn't told chronologically where like there's the Dresden section and then there's the alien section and then there's the post-alien section. It's not written that way because for Billy, Dresden isn't one part of his life. It continues to shape everything that follows and launch him back into things that were even before it. There's this repeated phrase, so it goes. Each time someone dies or their death we're made aware of the death in the book. Big events, meaningful events, tragic events, and then small ones that shouldn't affect him the same, he responds the same to each of them. And it's this sort of hands-off, so it goes. I think the way I interpret it, and give me your thoughts if you see it differently, I think in part it is a coping mechanism. Death has become so common to Billy. It's become such a commonplace thing that he sees everywhere that you kind of have to be desensitized to it at some point in order to keep moving forward. This idea that like death is inevitable, what are you gonna do about it? We have to move on. So it goes. This idea, I think, is reinforced in the aliens, the Tralfamadorians. I think it's reinforced in them in the way that they view time. All moments exist simultaneously in time, and you can kind of view them as you might view a span of mountains. And so if someone is dead in front of you, then like, sure, they are in that moment in time, but in plenty of other moments in time, they're perfectly fine. So they're in an unfortunate condition now, but they're in a better condition, you know, at a different point in time. So it goes. This very distanced way of looking at life and time, I think, is reflective of being unstuck, you know, because time is not moving chronologically. And so it's really easy to see this moment in time as insignificant because it's not the only moment that you're living necessarily. But also they have this idea on free will that is also, I think, reflective of his PTSD trauma. That's redundant, and processing, because I think Billy feels a lot of survivor's guilt. He feels guilt for surviving, and if he doesn't have free will, and nor does anyone else, then whatever happens to us is just the way it goes. It's not his responsibility. It's not something to feel guilt over. It's not something that he has to really respond to at all. It's something that he can just accept and move on. It also helps him to accept terrible things that have happened to him. When he's a prisoner of war and he's stripped down, that's disorienting, confusing, humiliating, horrible experience for him. But when he's abducted by the aliens and he's stripped down and put in the zoo, it's kind of okay. You know, it's like, it's not that traumatic. It's not that bad. It's all kind of all right, actually. And I think that there's several instances of this that happen in the novel where something happens to Billy in real life, and then it's kind of reframed through what happens with the aliens. It's like him detaching himself of the moment and accepting it. So it goes. But I don't think necessarily that the book, well, I don't think at all that the book is framing the alien's perspective as the correct one. I think that it's framing the alien perspective as the coping one. Their mentality helps him to endure these terrible memories that he keeps being launched back into and that he keeps having to relive, but it also causes this detachment that I think sends us back to what was said in chapter 1. You're going to write an anti-war story, might as well write an anti-glacier story. War ain't going anywhere, and trying to get rid of it ain't going to do anything. I think the perspective of the aliens, the mentality, the ideology of the aliens reflects that sort of mentality of war's going nowhere, why fight it? If everything is predetermined, then what's the point in trying to resist it anyway, right? But I think the novel also raises the question, does just accepting death like that, this actually bring peace? Or does it make people just too willing to accept the suffering around them and the circumstances around them? This philosophy presents the imagery of humans just being like bugs trapped in amber. Nothing they can do is going to change anything anyway. They're just trapped in certain moments with no ability to really do anything about it. And I think that that is reflective of the feeling of trauma, of being trapped in these moments, despite wanting to be able to move past them and start moving through time chronologically again. You don't really get that choice. You're just stuck here. You're just trapped. And there's nothing you can do, and you don't have the free will to change it, and you don't have the free will to stop these horrific things from happening. So it goes. But that's spoken from his place of trauma, not from the place of this is the ideal. I think. The book is called Slaughterhouse-Five, and that's because at one point the soldiers take refuge in an old slaughterhouse, kind of drawing this imagery of animals that are put in this slaughterhouse for the purpose of being killed, and then now we have these soldiers being thrown right into that same imagery, being thrown into the machine. I think the war largely fights against the glamorization of violence. Once again, we'll circle back to chapter 1, where it says that Billy grew up, got married, had kids, and he taught his sons, "I have told my sons that they are not under any circumstances to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think we need machinery like that." I think this novel can be pretty well summed up with that quote, or rather, the message of the novel can pretty well be summed up in that one quote. Don't make killing sound noble, and stop sending children to war. I think Vought's ideas are very plain in this book, and he told it in a weird and abstract and dark and confusing way that causes the reader, I think, to have to try to figure out the meaning behind certain things, and I may have gotten some of it wrong, so feel free to give me your interpretations if they're different from mine. But I think it's also, in its own way, an experience of feeling somewhat that feeling of being unstuck in time because of the trauma that you've experienced. And that's why it's written that way. Maybe, unless all his books are written that way, and in that case, I'm reaching really far. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have read the book and have thoughts as well, please feel free to express them here, or rather in the comments would be more useful because then I could read them too. Please chat with me more in the comments. I'll see you again soon. Bye.